Have you ever wondered why some of history's most innovative minds struggled in traditional classrooms? Research reveals a striking pattern. Students who excel at rule following and compliance often struggled to innovate later in life. A 2014 University of Pennsylvania study found that nonconformists were 27% more likely to become entrepreneurs than their rule-abiding peers. The very students receiving the highest praise were, statistically, the least likely to disrupt industries or create groundbreaking solutions. This raises a profound question that Machiavelli would immediately seize upon. If our education system truly aimed to create independent thinkers and future leaders, wouldn't this outcome be considered catastrophic? Or perhaps it's working exactly as designed. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. These words from Niccolò Machiavelli's masterwork, The Prince, capture the essence of what we'll explore today. The hidden purpose behind modern education systems and how they shape us in ways that Machiavelli himself would recognize as tools of social control. Machiavelli understood that the most effective forms of control don't appear as control at all. As he wrote, "The vulgar crowd always is taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar." The genius of modern education isn't found in its obvious restrictions, but in how it shapes thinking while appearing to expand it. Consider how brilliantly the system employs his principle that it is much safer to be feared than loved. Yet fear works best when disguised as care. Our education system doesn't subjugate through obvious force, but through subtle mechanisms that shape how students view themselves and their capabilities. Before we continue, I want to be crystal clear. This isn't an attack on teachers. Most educators enter the profession with genuine passion and care deeply about their students' development. What we're examining is the system itself, its historical origins, structural design, and unspoken purposes that Machiavelli would immediately recognize as instruments of power maintenance. The modern education system wasn't primarily designed by educators or child development experts. Its fundamental structure was largely shaped by industrialists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, who needed a workforce with specific characteristics. Factory owners didn't need free thinkers. They needed reliable workers who would arrive on time, follow instructions without question, and accept hierarchical authority. Charles Eliot, president of Harvard University, made this purpose explicit in 1905. "We want one class of persons to have a liberal education, and we want another class of persons, a very much larger class of necessity, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult, manual tasks." This two-tiered approach perfectly embodies Machiavelli's understanding of power. In The Prince, he advises rulers to maintain distinct classes, those who rule and those who serve. The education system creates this separation while maintaining the illusion of meritocracy. Finland has shown alternative approaches are possible, ranking consistently among the world's best education systems, while emphasizing student autonomy, minimal standardized testing, and play-based learning. But as Machiavelli would point out, what serves power isn't always what serves populations. Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions, wrote Machiavelli. Education brilliantly applies this insight through arbitrary rules that have nothing to do with learning. Consider prohibitions against chewing gum, strict dress codes, walking on specific sides of hallways. These rules primarily normalize following arbitrary directives without question. Studies show children obey rules they don't understand, mistaking authority for morality. For example, psychologists found that adolescents often defer to adults even when rules lack logical justification. Machiavelli would recognize this as masterful conditioning. He advised princes that subjects must be kept satisfied and content, not through freedom, but through the illusion of order and purpose. By training children to follow rules without understanding their purpose, education creates adults psychologically conditioned to comply with regulations, even when those regulations might work against their own interests.
Contrast this with Sugatamitra's hole-in-the-wall experiments in India, which demonstrated that children with minimal guidance could teach themselves complex computer skills through curiosity-driven exploration. When given freedom to learn naturally, children showed remarkable self-organization and critical thinking. Precisely the qualities Machiavelli would warn rulers to suppress in populations they wish to control. This disciplinary framework seamlessly reinforces another powerful mechanism: dependency on external validation. From gold stars to grade point averages, from teacher approval to standardized test scores, students are trained to measure their worth through others' assessments. As Machiavelli noted, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you. External validation creates adults who fundamentally doubt their own judgment, perpetually seeking approval from authority figures. When your sense of value comes primarily from outside yourself, you become easier to influence through simple approval mechanisms. Adults raised on external validation often prioritized praise over purpose. A 2020 study linked academic perfectionism to workplace anxiety and risk aversion. The need for external validation that began in school directly affected their adult economic decisions and bargaining power. Exactly the outcome Machiavelli would design to create compliant citizens. Montessori education, which emphasizes self-directed learning and intrinsic motivation, offers a compelling counterpoint to this validation trap. It has produced disproportionate numbers of creative innovators. Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin, Amazon's Jeff Bezos, and Wikipedia founder Jimmy Wales all attended Montessori schools. This alternative approach develops precisely what Machiavelli would caution rulers against: independent judgment and internal validation. Beyond discipline and validation, traditional education employs a third mechanism of control: knowledge fragmentation. By dividing learning into isolated subjects, education makes it difficult to see connections and understand systems as a whole. This compartmentalization is fundamentally Machiavellian. When knowledge is disconnected from its context, it becomes harder to identify patterns of power or develop comprehensive solutions to complex problems. A prince ought to have no other aim or thought than war and its rules and discipline, wrote Machiavelli. The fragmentation of knowledge serves as a form of intellectual disarmament, preventing citizens from recognizing interconnected systems of power. Simultaneously, through curved grading, class rankings, and competitive admissions, education teaches that success is scarce and must come at others' expense. This creates the exact mindset Machiavelli advocated rulers should foster among their subjects. A prince should sow discord amongst the citizens of conquered cities. This fragmentation reinforces a fear of failure that further limits potential. Men should be either treated generously or destroyed, Machiavelli advised, because they take revenge for slight injuries. For heavy ones, they cannot. Education applies this principle through its punishment of mistakes and wrong answers. Remember the weight of getting an F, the shame of a wrong answer, the potential mockery that might follow a stupid question. Education systematically punishes mistakes more than it rewards exploration. This creates people terrified of being wrong, who avoid risks and stick to safe, proven paths, even when innovation might better serve them. In a rapidly changing world, this risk aversion is crippling for individuals. Yet it serves existing power structures perfectly. Risk-averse people rarely challenge systems or create disruptive alternatives. This disconnect explains why many transformative thinkers struggled in traditional educational settings. Richard Branson dropped out of school at 16. Steve Jobs dropped out of Reed College but audited calligraphy classes. later crediting them for Apple's revolutionary typography. His lesson: you can't connect the dots looking forward, only backward. These innovators found ways to escape the triple constraints of arbitrary discipline, external validation, and fragmented knowledge, precisely the mechanisms that Machiavelli would recognize as tools of control. While much of traditional education may limit certain aspects of development, Machiavelli himself would acknowledge that proper education is vital for those who wish to lead effectively. In The Prince, he emphasizes the importance of studying history. Wise men say, and not without reason, that whoever wishes to foresee the future must consult the past, for human events ever resemble those of preceding times. Certain educational approaches genuinely develop leadership capabilities that Machiavelli would admire. He believed deeply in learning from historical examples. As he wrote, "A prudent man should always follow in the path trodden by great men and imitate those who are most excellent." Education that focuses on historical case studies, political strategy, and understanding power dynamics can produce leaders with nuanced understanding of human nature and societal forces. The most effective leaders have often been students of history who could apply past lessons to present challenges. Winston Churchill's extensive historical knowledge informed his strategic decisions during World War II. Similarly, figures like Angela Merkel have drawn on her self-understanding to navigate complex modern challenges. Militaries and certain leadership programs deliberately create challenging conditions precisely because they understand what Machiavelli knew. Leadership capabilities are forged through confronting and overcoming obstacles, not through comfort. These educational approaches don't shield students from difficulty, but teach them to navigate it successfully. While Machiavelli is often mischaracterized as advocating pure ruthlessness, a careful reading of his work reveals his understanding that effective leadership requires deep understanding of human psychology. As he wrote, "Men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear." Education that develops emotional intelligence, the ability to read others accurately and manage relationships effectively, creates leaders who can navigate human dynamics successfully. The key distinction is whether education serves to limit potential or to develop it fully, whether it creates followers or leaders. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves, wrote Machiavelli. This metaphor perfectly captures the need to develop your own validation systems independent of external approval. What part of your educational conditioning has been hardest to overcome? Ask yourself, what would I think about this if no one else's opinion mattered? Practice trusting your judgment, especially when it contradicts conventional wisdom or authority. This internal compass is what Machiavelli considered essential for any effective leader. Maria, a former straight-A student, shared her experience. "I spent years chasing perfect grades, but found myself paralyzed in my career whenever I had to make decisions without clear rubrics. My breakthrough came when I started a side project solely for my own satisfaction, with no external metrics. That project eventually became my most successful venture, precisely because I wasn't constrained by trying to please others." How might your life change if you trusted your internal validation over external approval? Developing internal validation naturally leads to another crucial skill: interdisciplinary thinking. Machiavelli was the ultimate interdisciplinary thinker, drawing on history, psychology, military strategy, and political theory to form his comprehensive worldview. He would advise you to actively seek connections across disciplines and domains that traditional education keeps separate. When you learn history, consider the economic forces at play. When you study science, Explore the ethical implications. Look for the complete picture that fragmented education often obscures. This comprehensive understanding is what gives you power to see systems clearly and operate effectively within them. Alternative education models like big picture learning demonstrate this approach in practice. Their students spend substantial time in internships connected to their interests, then bring real-world observations back to academic studies. The results speak for themselves. Graduation rates and college success in these programs consistently outperform traditional models. Building on interdisciplinary thinking, Machiavelli would advise embracing strategic risk-taking. He understood that setbacks are inevitable in any worthwhile endeavor. As he wrote, all courses of action are risky. So, prudence is not in avoiding danger. It's impossible. But calculating risk and acting decisively. The innovator's mindset treats failures not as shameful endpoints, but as essential prototypes, necessary iterations towards success. Stanford's D-School teaches students to write failure resumes, documenting setbacks as badges of honor. Graduates who use this method report reduced anxiety and greater willingness to tackle challenges. This practice dramatically reduces anxiety and increases willingness to tackle challenging material. "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally," wrote Machiavelli. Applied to breaking educational conditioning, this means connecting strategically with others who are asking similar questions and challenging the same assumptions. Collective awareness and action have transformative power that individual efforts rarely achieve alone. Developer Alex Chen describes his experience. "What changed everything for me wasn't just recognizing how my education had limited my thinking. It was finding a community of others making the same discovery. Together, we created learning experiences none of us could have designed alone." While personal strategies are essential, Machiavelli himself would recognize that transforming systems requires institutional change. Several approaches demonstrate that alternatives are not merely theoretical, but already successful in practice. Project-based learning revolutionizes traditional instruction by connecting academic content to world challenges. High Tech High in San Diego has implemented this approach school-wide, replacing conventional courses with multidisciplinary projects addressing authentic problems. Their documentary, Most Likely to Succeed, showcases students developing sophisticated skills while maintaining natural curiosity and engagement. This pedagogical shift requires teacher training, project facilitation, and curriculum redesign around essential questions rather than isolated facts. But the investment pays off in graduates who demonstrate both technical competence and creative thinking. Moving beyond isolated examples, Finland's educational approach demonstrates that national systems can prioritize well-being and deep learning over standardized testing and rigid compliance. Finnish teachers have advanced degrees, considerable professional freedom, and fewer instructional hours than teachers in most developed countries, allowing time for collaborative planning and innovation. Finnish students consistently outperform those in more rigid systems, while reporting higher levels of happiness and engagement. The Finnish model shows that teacher autonomy produces superior results compared to top-down standardization, suggesting that education reform should focus on professionalizing teaching rather than standardizing it. Complementing these structural changes, assessment transformation is another critical reform. Our current assessment systems primarily measure compliance and memorization rather than creativity, terrific thinking, or collaborative problem-solving. Envision Schools in California have pioneered a graduation portfolio system where students must defend their work before a panel, demonstrating competencies that matter for real-world success. This approach has produced dramatic improvements in college persistence rates among traditionally underserved populations, showing that meaningful assessment can be both rigorous and empowering. Policy changes supporting authentic assessment would include reduced standardized testing mandates, funding for portfolio development systems, and university admissions criteria that value demonstrated competencies over standardized metrics.
These alternatives show that education can nurture rather than constrain human potential. They prove that learning can be simultaneously rigorous and joyful, structured and creative. Most importantly, they demonstrate that Machiavellian insights about power and control can be used not just to limit human potential, but to liberate it. Machiavelli would recognize that true freedom comes not from fighting existing systems, but from building your own. The wise prince has always avoided relying on borrowed arms, he wrote, a principle that applies perfectly to intellectual and professional development. What would your life look like if you built knowledge based on curiosity rather than curriculum? The most liberated minds develop personal systems that operate independently of institutional frameworks. This self-reliance begins with creating your own metrics for progress. While schools measure success through grades and credentials, autonomous thinkers track problems solved, skills mastered, and meaningful projects completed. When was the last time you pursued learning purely for its intrinsic value? Identifying your natural learning style is equally crucial. How you absorb information when not forced into standardized approaches. Some learn visually, others through experimentation or teaching peers. Perhaps most importantly, self-reliance means developing your own definition of purpose rather than adopting external success metrics. What would you pursue if you completely disregarded conventional status markers? This often reveals aspirations buried beneath layers of conditioning. Here's where things get truly interesting. There's a profound paradox that Machiavelli himself would appreciate. Understanding how systems attempt to shape you is itself a form of immunity to that shaping. As Machiavelli wrote, a prince should therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. This suggests something fascinating. Perhaps the greatest education isn't the content you're explicitly taught, but the opportunity to observe and understand systems of control. By studying how education attempts to shape you, you gain insight into how all power structures operate. This meta-awareness is precisely what those invested in maintaining current systems would prefer you not develop. It's why discussions about the purposes of education rarely appear within educational curricula themselves. As Machiavelli understood, the most effective power is that which remains unexamined. I experienced this personally throughout school. I was told I asked too many questions, that my curiosity beyond the curriculum was disruptive. My papers were often marked down for exploring ideas outside the assigned scope. For years, I believed this meant something was wrong with my thinking. It wasn't until I encountered Machiavelli's writings that I realized those impulses to question, to explore beyond boundaries, weren't weaknesses. They were my greatest strengths. The very qualities the system tried to suppress were the ones that would ultimately lead to success and fulfillment. We stand at a fascinating crossroads in human history. The educational system designed for the industrial age persists even as we've entered a completely different era, one that increasingly rewards exactly what traditional education often suppresses: creativity, independent thinking, risk-taking, and collaborative innovation. The question isn't whether elements of what you learned in school were designed to limit you. The evidence strongly suggests some aspects were. The real question, and the one Machiavelli would focus on, is what will you do with that awareness? Will you continue seeking grades and approval in different forms throughout your adult life?
Will you keep following rules without questioning their purpose? Will you remain afraid of being wrong and looking foolish? Or will you recognize these as conditioned responses that you can consciously choose to replace with different patterns? Machiavelli's most profound insight about personal power is that it ultimately comes from seeing clearly, seeing through appearances to underlying realities. As he wrote, "Men in general judge more by the sight than by the touch, because everyone can see, but few can test by feeling." The most valuable person to any system of positive change is one who can perceive how control operates and envision alternatives. This journey is about more than just education. It's about reclaiming your mind's natural capacity for creativity, critical thinking, and independent judgment. It's about recognizing that what makes you dangerous to systems of control is exactly what makes you valuable to humanity's future. If this has resonated with you, if you recognize these patterns in your own educational experience and want to break free from them, share this with someone who needs to hear it. The greatest act of resistance against systems designed to limit human potential is to awaken that potential in others. Remember what Machiavelli understood centuries ago. True power doesn't come from blind obedience to external systems, but from developing the capacity to think for yourself. It's the one skill they can never take away from you, and the one skill that would make Machiavelli himself nod in approval.